All right, we're going to start out our presentation today with a map showing the western reaches of Lake Minnetonka that was published back in 1903. And this is the area that it mostly covers the area today that we consider Westonka. Today we're going to tour by photographs over 40 different locations in the western Lake Minnetonka area. And what we'll do is we'll show a photo taken before, which would be the then, and then we'll contrast that with a photo that was just recently taken here in the last 8 months or so. So with that, we'll start our tour from Lake Minnetonka shores. We'll head out on the shoreline, take a left and start heading west. And this is the Seton Channel Bridge that was built in 1930 that crossed or spanned the Seton Channel for many years. This photo was taken in its later years, probably around the late 70s. And we contrast that with a photo of the bridge that's there today from the same spot. So you kind of see how it works. Moving across the channel, we're into the area that was actually kind of a separate little town called Seton. It had its own railway platform, and there were some commercial businesses back here, Carlson's place, and we had the Babblers Resort back there. And you can see the railroad bridge, the Great Northern here, crossing Seton Channel. Contrast that today, it's kind of overgrown, so you don't see a whole lot, but you can see the Dakota Trail that's taken the place of the railroad over on the right. We'll go across the street, and we see a gas station, an old Shell station on the corner of Bartlett and Shoreline Boulevard. I believe this photo was taken sometime early 40s, possibly earlier. We'll contrast that with the building that's there now, which I believe is probably the same building. Small engine repair there on Bartlett and Shoreline. Let's head southwest on Bartlett Boulevard. We skim along the shore of Seton Lake or Seton Bay. Both terms are used. We're looking east towards Black Lake Channel. Looks fairly empty and wild. Here's the view today of some fishermen taken a couple of weeks ago. Now we're down to Bartlett and Wilshire Boulevard, and we're looking north. And this is the site of the old Mound golf course, which opened about 1929, about the time of this photo, and covered the area which we now know as around Shirley Hills and the fire station. This particular photo was to commemorate the 29ers. It was kind of a local business booster group that actually sponsored the first summer celebration back in 1929. Here's a panoramic view today. We've got Bartlett Boulevard in front of us, running from the west to the east, and then Wilshire Boulevard heading up north. And so that's where the old golf course was. We'll continue up Wilshire. Here's Shirley Hills Elementary School shortly after it opened back in the mid-1950s. And here it is today. We'll continue up Wilshire to Shoreline. And of course we come to this big building, which was originally Tonka Toys, operated in Mound from 1946 until 1983. And this photo was taken kind of towards the end there, probably around 81 or so. And that building today, of course, is the Balboa Business Center. Now we'll get back on Shoreline, heading west into Mound, and we'll see several places. This is the old red brick school building that was originally on the northeast corner of Linwood Boulevard and Commerce Boulevard. It kind of sat back at an angle to the intersection. So this is another view, and you can see some of the houses. I think this is over on Linwood, over here on the far right. And here's the view today. It's occupied by the Wells Fargo parking lot and the shopping center, which you probably recognize. This is a transitional photo taken about 15 or so years ago. we've got the new shopping center over here. We still have some original buildings here, the old Coast to Coast and Scotty B's. And then we jump ahead, and now we see where County Road 15 has been realigned right through that area. Now we'll go to the railroad depot. Back in 1900, decision was made by the Great Northern to expand or extend their branch line from Wayzata out to Hutchinson. Originally it stopped in Spring Park, where it ended from 1881 to 1900. Shortly after the railroad was extended, they built this small station. In 1915, that building burned and was replaced with this depot building, more substantial structure. This view looking east, and you can see shoreline, the original Shoreline Boulevard over on the far right. And here's the view today. You can see the True Value on the left and the bank building on the right. Got some more views of the depot. This is looking northeast. You can see there's a passenger train on the far right. At one time, there were actually 6 passenger trains per day coming into Mound during the week. And this number increased to 17 on busy weekends and holidays. Here's that view today. You can see the municipal parking ramp. This view is on the other side of the tracks looking southwest. You see the bowling alley on the old shoreline, and on the far right, we've got the Commerce Boulevard, some businesses over here. And here's that view today. Back at that time, you could get a round-trip ticket to Minneapolis for only 50 cents. Here's a view of the depot today. In 1967, it was moved over to Surfside Park. It was intended to be a museum. It was since taken over by the city, where you can rent it for private events. And here's a view of the depot from the lakeside. Getting back to trains, this is a view from the 1950s when the railroad was quite downsized from what it was doing back in the early days. They called this a mixed train. We've got a few freight cars along with one passenger car on this small train heading west to Hutchinson, crossing over the West Edge Boulevard Bridge here. And here's that view today. It's the Dakota Trail, and we've got a lot of construction going on over at the water treatment facility right now. Back to the depot and Mound. This is a view looking to the northeast. Looks like some construction going on there on Old Shoreline. This is the view today, the Minnesota Lakes Bank. Now we're on the original alignment of Shoreline Drive, looking west towards Commerce. We see the train depot over here on the right, and over here on the left side is the Northland Greyhound bus depot, along with the cafe. Looks like a pretty bustling area there. Here's the view today, a little bit forlorn. Here's a later view of the House of Moy restaurant on Shoreline, the south side. Here's the view today. Continuing on the south side of Shoreline, this was the original police station. And when this photo was taken in 2000, it was obviously occupied by Merry Maids. And this is the view today. We're going to pop up north of Mound a little bit. This is the turnoff from Commerce Boulevard onto 3 Points. So we have a large advertisement here for the neighborhoods that were developed out there, Dreamwood, Woodland Point, and Shadywood Point. And here's the view today, looking south on Commerce and 3 Points Boulevard. This is Phil Brooks' store that was operating out pretty much in the center of 3 Points. And this is still the same building, still stands there on 3 Points Boulevard. This is on the south side of 3 Points, probably around Bluebird or Cardinal. looking southeast across Harrison's Bay. And this is pretty close to the same view today. A lot of boats and docks. We head back to Mound on the west side of Commerce, of course, is the location of what was then Grandview Junior High School. This photo was taken pretty close to after it was built, around 1960 in this photo. And of course, it became the Grandview Middle School in later years. Now we're on the south side of Harrison's Bay. This photo was taken from Centerview Beach, if you're familiar with where that is, looking east. And here's the location today. We'll go a little bit further west. We're actually on West Side Lane, and still looking north towards 3 Points. And I believe this is the same view today. If you look at these trees, I believe these are the same trees shown in the view. Back into Mound, the Commerce Boulevard, we're looking at the Kaler building. This housed a grocery store and post office. And next door was the Mound Hardware. I'm not sure what this one was on the right. And we can see the railroad tracks in front of the store here. And here's the view today. We have Dakota Junction and Walgreens. Quite a change. That building that was looming in the back there is the high school that was built in 1917. It fronted on Linwood Boulevard on the, would be the northwest corner of the intersection today. And that's occupied by the shopping center with Carboni's there on the corner. So the high school would probably have been back here a little bit. In 1938, the WPA built an addition to the 1917 building. This is a view here probably from the, shortly after that, maybe early 40s. Of course, that frontage now is part of the shopping center. Here's the 1938 building with a view taken from the northeast. If you look at those pine trees that are growing out here, here's one of those pine trees with the building shortly before it was demolished. Keep an eye on the pine tree. Now here's the view of where the high school building was. The shopping center in front of the shop, the parking lot in front of the shopping center. Now we're on Commerce Boulevard looking south. The high school building over here, we can see Warhol Drugs, which later became Mueller Drugs. Got a bakery, clothing store, I believe, and little superette grocery store on the corner, and Anderson Automotive down here. Here's that view today. That side of the street's pretty much taken over by Wells Fargo, and then the hardware store on the corner down here. Another view, back side of the high school looking east. Whoop. Here's that view today, pretty much standing in front of the liquor store looking across the parking lot. Later view, just brought this along to kind of point out the pods that were built in 1964 to replace the 1917 building that burned in 1963. That view today, of course, the parking lot again. Backing up a little ways more from the old high school buildings, we see the football field over here and the baseball fields. And this area has been filled in by the townhomes. This is a bird's eye view of Mound that was taken from the roof of the 1917 high school building. It's kind of interesting because it gives you a layout of what things looked at around 1920. We've got the busy passenger train station here, and we've got the bowling alley, we've got some commercial buildings, Crocker Building, and some other things here. What's interesting about this photo, you see it looks like a bunch of smoke back here. That's the Lost Lake Canal that was cut in 1906. It was intended to allow boats to come off Cook's Bay and come up to the railroad station. Well, that didn't work out real well, and the canal had a tendency to fill in a lot. So to try to shore up the side of the canal, they planted a bunch of willow trees, and that's what you're seeing here in this photo. Now we're right in the heart of the commercial district. When the railroad came through in 1900, it had a big effect on Mound. It basically started as Mound City, right on the Cook's Bay shoreline. But once that railroad came through, everything kind of moved up here to the original Shoreline Boulevard and Commerce Boulevard looking south. Got the Switzerland Hotel, grocery store, original bank building here. And here's the view today. And the old bank building right here. Now we're looking north on Commerce Boulevard, a little bit further south. We see the Ben Franklin, Gamble's. Here's the bank building, Mound Movie Theater, Crocker Building over here. Here's the view today. This is on the east side of the Commerce Boulevard. We've got this gas station automotive building here. Taken in the 1920s. We go maybe 10 or so years ahead, and we see that it's a Ford dealership called Finley Motors. Here's a later view. Part of that building was still standing, about 1980. And now we have Auditors Road coming out on Commerce at that spot. Talk about the Crocker Building is a shot here looking from the northwest. Originally housed a hotel called the Bonnie Inn. Also had a dry goods store. In this photo from about 1950, we see there's a dentist that's working upstairs here. And most of us probably remember that as being the Long Praise clothing store that operated for many years in that building. And here's the view today, pretty much just vacant lot. A little bit further south, we come up to the Williams Shoe Store. This is Lost Lake behind here. This building was added onto, but in recent years has been pretty much empty. There were several businesses along Commerce between the main part of town and the lake. This is, I believe, a livery stable operated by the Krause family. We've got Lake Langdon back here. And that's just a view of Lake Langdon today. All right, and then we come down to the lakeside, and we're at the famous Chapman House Hotel, which was opened in 1876 by brothers Seymour and Sumner Chapman. They had 300 or 700 guests that first summer that they opened up. This is the view today where the Chapman House Hotel was. You can see for placement the condos there to the left. This is a photo or postcard view of the hotel up close after 1900. And this one's in a little bit later on, I think about 1912. By that time, the Pearson family had taken over management of the hotel. And if we're looking from Commerce Boulevard, this is probably the approximate location of where the hotel was. In 1900, Mrs. John Chapman had this building erected. It was a boat rental. I don't know if they had bowling or dancing early on, probably refreshments for sure. She built that for her son Cecil to have something to do. You can see one of the Twin City streetcar boats coming up. Another view from the side. This view here is taken from the Highlands, looking back towards that building. You can see it over here, and then the hotel's back up here in the trees. Same view, but a few years later, we can see that they've added a complete second story and large roof. And that building looks a lot more familiar now, doesn't it? It's the surf side. This Photo was taken in the late 70s. And here's the view today, the Chapman Place condos. Okay, we are turning towards the south, looking up at the Highlands and Hardscrabble Point from the Surfside Beach. Here's that view today. On the high ridge between Langdon and Cooks Bay was the location of another Chapman hotel. This one was called the Mountain City House. Also on that ridge was in 1912, Charles Uttman built the Sunset View Villa, which they advertise as always being cool and a grand place to rest and eat. A lot of people ask if there's any old hotels left on Lake Minnetonka. Usually the answer is no, but that's not true. This hotel still stands today on Commerce Boulevard. Mr. Uttman also built this building at the end of the driveway, which he called Uttman's Tea House. It was a snack shop, combination deli, ice cream parlor. Go across the street into Surfside Park. This is the barbecue grill or pit or whatever that was built by the WPA. And over here on the right is a boat rental refreshment place that was operated by Frank Pearson. And here's the view today, a little bit emptier. We kind of wonder if this rock right here might be one of the, whoops, jumping ahead, might be one of these rocks out here somewhere. Hard to say. Moving down the shoreline of Cooks Bay, this is the Hotel Buena Vista. It was opened in 1903 by Captain Jack Hart and his wife Julia. And this was one of the newer lake hotels, smaller, more bed and breakfast size, I guess you would call it. Captain Jack was known as the Dean of Minnetonka fishermen, and he would take his guests by rowboat up into the upper lake to the best fishing spots, as well as taking people out to Whaletail and Dutch Lake. Captain Jack passed away in 1920 and his hotel burned in 1926. This is the current location of the Buena Vista Hotel, now part of the Highlands neighborhood. Next door to the Buena Vista is the site of the Baptist Assembly Grounds. This was a famous religious retreat that attracted visitors from all over the United States starting in 1900. This is their boat landing on the lake. This is the view now. This is part of the Highlands neighborhood. They had their own hotel, dining hall, camping facilities, water tower. This is actually a photo of the dining hall. And this is that location today. It's the corner of Fairfield and Highland. They also had their own tennis courts and ball fields. Here's the tennis courts. And this is that view today. No more tennis courts. You could rent a cabin at the assembly grounds for $75 for the whole summer. By the late 40s, it was known as the Midwest Keswick, which was a non-denominational religious camp. And its claim to fame was that in 1950, Billy Graham paid a visit to this location. Further on in the Highlands, this is a high point looking southeast over Hardscrabble Point and some of the other islands in the upper lake. The Highlands was actually one of the earlier developments in the Westonka area, being platted in 1911. Lots ran on the lake lots off the lake were $200, and if you wanted to cough up the big dough, you paid $1,000 to get a lot right on the water. And this is the view today. Before it became the Highlands development, it was owned by St. Paul Railroad executive Oscar C. Green. And he had his summer place on the north side of Priest Bay in the Highlands area. And this is a view of that where he had his home. We're going to continue west on Bartlett. We're at the intersection of County Road 44. And we see a combination gas station and restaurant that was operating probably in the 1940s. Here's the intersection today. There's still a remnant log building that's still standing there from that commercial area. And this is actually the restaurant from the south side. It was known as the Chicken Inn. Taken probably around 64, 65, somewhere in there. North side of Halstead Bay, this is where the trailer park formerly was located. It's being developed soon. When this photo was taken in the early 1900s, it was actually a resort there. Here's a view today. We're heading south on 44. This is the channel between Priest and Halsted's, looking east. Here's a view today. Continuing on County Road 44, this is Halstead Bay over here, and the turnoff to Hardscrabble right here. This big bluff, known to locals at the time as Indian Hill, because there's a set of Indian mounds up in this area that are still existent. This photo was taken probably not long after the road was cut in 1905. And here's the view today. Okay, we're moving further down 44 to the site of the famous Hermitage, one of the most famous historic sites in the Westonka area. This is a picture of Frank Halsted, who moved to the Lake Minnetonka area, and he homesteaded in 1855 on the south side of Halstead Bay. He served in the Civil War, came back, I believe, as a captain, decided to move his abode over onto the main upper lake, and he built his cabin there, and it became known as the Hermitage here, opposite Crane Island. Frank was not a real true hermit. He was actually pretty involved with things going on back in the early days. He was the first justice of the peace of Minnetrista and performed the first wedding ceremony in Minnetrista. He was involved with some businesses and also the Congregational Church in Excelsior. And he was in the steamboat business. He built a steamboat named the Mary for his mother. And the story goes that a day or so before he was going to launch the boat in 1876, in the summer there, he mysteriously disappeared. A few days later, they found his body floating in the lake, weighted down by some heavy stones between Crane Island and the Hermitage. Coroner ruled it a suicide. There was a lot of talk about some business problems and some other personal issues. This is a view of Crane Island today. So anyway, his brother George Halsted decided to come out from the family home in New Jersey and settle up his brother's affairs. Well, he liked things so much that he decided to stick around and became the second hermit of Lake Minnetonka for 25 more years. Now, George was a lot more eccentric than Frank and played the role of the hermit pretty well, to the point where summer tourists in the steamboats would actually make a stop at his place and picnic there because they found him quite odd and interesting. And he had a lot of weird stuff in his house, a lot of old antiques. But unfortunately, George also came to a sad end in 1901 when he burned in a fire in the home. They attribute it to smoking in bed. So anyway, this is the site of the Hermitage today. It's a recent development. Most of these homes are now completed. A plaque has actually been erected, if you've been down there, that points out the nearby burial location of the two brothers. And it's my understanding, Jerry maybe know for sure that the two are buried somewhere in this location here on the shore. Moving on south of the Hermitage, still on 44, we come to the site of the Wood End Dairy Farm estate. This was started to assemble by Albert C. Loring, a Minneapolis milling executive, about 1900. And Loring was actually the son of Charles Loring, who was with the Minneapolis Park system. That's hence Loring Park downtown. He set out to have the most up-to-date, state-of-the-art dairy operation. And so he had this huge barn built for his cows. And it was very unusual at the time because it had so many windows in it. You can see some other photos of the dairy operation here. This is the original entrance gate to the estate, just off 44. Loring published brochures that highlighted his Guernseys. This one here was set right with the lake in the background. And this is that view today. Another photo, kind of fuzzy, points out the location of the main buildings, the barn, the Loring Mansion, boarding house, creamery building. The only thing surviving is the original Loring home, this English Tudor style house. Another view taken from the hill behind the farm. You see the creamery building down here. These greenhouses were actually operated in later years by Bachmans. Here's a picture of the creamery building that I took in October. And to prove how things change quickly with historic places, this is the view now. Three Rivers decided to take the building down. This is as far southwest we'll go and then turn around again. This is Umbra Heights. It was a streetcar stop. This is the Van Dusen estate back here. Old maps show this little cove here as Lillian Bay. This is a photo of Lillian Bay last fall. Now we're heading back up 44. This is another earlier view of that road. Back then it was called the Zambra Heights Mound Road, taken about 1920. Here we are about 15, 20 years later. And here's the highway today. Couple views. On Halstead's Bay on the southwest side was located a famous bed of American Lotus Lilies. This was really a pretty important tourist spot that, again, the hotel people would bring people up and view the lotus lilies that were down here on the shoreline. This is a modern view taken not too far from that spot. And here's a picture close-up of a Halstead Bay Lotus. These were making a pretty good comeback a few years ago. A couple beds were doing quite well, but we've been out on the lake last year or so, and we've had a hard time finding them again. I'm not sure if it's from the encroaching development or water traffic or what, but they make a neat flower. This is the Halstead Bay Bridge, the original one that was built when the highway was built in 1905. Here it is in its much later years, about 1980. And here's the bridge that replaced it in 1984. Now we're going to make a big jump back around the other side of Cook's Bay. This is Bartlett's Hotel that was opened in 1883 by Edward Bartlett on property that his parents own as a summer retreat. What's interesting about this photo is we can see some Indian mounds right out here next to the hotel. And here's the view today. There's still an Indian mound around there somewhere. Over here, maybe. In later years, the Bartlett Hotel came under other ownership. In this photo from the 20s, it's called the Kern Hotel. And by 1930, the place had pretty much fallen into disrepair and was abandoned, so the village had it demolished. We're on Wilshire now in Cook's Bay still, looking southwest towards Hardscrabble. Today, same spot, looking more southeast towards Cedar Point and Island Park. The view today. On the other side of Wilshire is tiny Emerald Bay or Emerald Lake. This view was taken back around 1950. Here's the same view on a busy Sunday last September. We cross over the Cooks Bay Bridge and we come to the Witchwood Inn Resort. They advertised the best beach on Lake Minnetonka, dancing every Saturday night, and chicken chow mein dinners on Sunday. Here's that view today. And I believe some of these older cottage buildings may be leftovers from the Witchwood Resort. You can see the Cooks Bay Bridge just way over here on the left. Continuing on, this is Witchwood Beach looking south at the Island Park. Here's the view today, Witchwood Beach. We'll head a little bit further out onto Island Park and stop at Chester Park. This view, again, probably from early 50s. And here's the view today. You can see Al and Alma's boats back over here. We'll back up on the hill a little ways, and we can see the original Chester Park Superette. Looked like it was a pretty busy place the day this photo was taken. 1956, the store was converted into a supper club, Al and Alma's. And here's a view today. Continuing out south on the island, we're going to cross over the Enchanted Bridge. We're looking back at Island Park here. Here's a view today. The original bridge was built in 1915, originally painted white, so everybody back in the 20s called it the White Bridge. Well, it had some work done to it, painted red, and it became, to a lot of us, in our memories, the Red Bridge. And of course, that bridge has been replaced by the current bridge. Going out on Enchanted Island, I thought I'd include this photo of this old boathouse tower. It plays a role, I believe, in a story that Dale Swanson had written, and he was a speaker here earlier this year. Talk about Charles Zimmerman, St. Paul photographer and watercolor artist. He bought the western half of Enchanted Island in 1877 and built a sprawling wooden summer home that he stayed in for a few years, but in 1888, that home burnt to the ground. He replaced it with a more substantial structure using a lot of rocks pulled out of the lake. Hence, he named it Boulder Lodge. And he must have done a pretty good job on this house because it survived the 1904 tornado. Here's a view today. Of course, that house is long gone. Now head out to the next island, Shady Island. It had its own hotel, the Shady Isle House, that was opened in 1880 by Major Thomas Harrow, who also had something to do with building the St. Louis Hotel on the east end of the lake. Here's that view today. Back on the island on the east side, it's the site of Woolno's Maple Heights Inn. This is another hotel that was built by the railroad to generate traffic. And they've actually installed one of their famous conductors, J.L. Woolno, to manage the hotel. And here's the view today. The hotel was right about over here. It's a Lake Winds condominiums. Another view of the hotel, but this is in later years after it became the Tippewalkin or Christian Club religious camp. Close-up view of the hotel. I understand it made it all the way to the early 60s. Go out in Spring Park Bay and we come to Goose Island. It was privately owned back in the 1880s by Mr. Reel at his cabin and boathouse. Here's Goose Island today. It's owned by Three Rivers Parks, and there's no buildings out there. Now we're going to leave the island and head to Spring Park. This is looking south, the original Black Lake Bridge. Here's the bridge today. This is a view that was taken from the old bridge looking towards Spring Park. We'll talk about this in a minute. And here's the view today. We're heading up Interlochen Road towards Shoreline, looking north. Black Lake here on the left. Here's the view today. This is a postcard of a Lake Minnetonka home, maybe a spec home, for sale at a very low price and reasonable terms. Is it possible that this could be one of those? They look very similar, don't they? Okay, we're at the corner of Shoreline and Interlochen, or County Roads 125 and 15. This is the site of Tim's Grocery and Post Office in Spring Park. View today, BP station. Now we're going to head east into Spring Park some more, and we're going to come up to another famous hotel, the Hotel del Otero. And this was built, again, by James J. Hill to generate some traffic out to the end of the branch line, and opened this in 1892. This location today is the condominiums in Spring Park. A little bit wider view, we can see County Road 15 on its current alignment. For several years, it jogged up Sunset Drive and then made a kind of a jog back to where it is today. And here's that view today with County Road 15. Across the road was the beach. This is a view looking southwest towards Island Park and Pelican Point. Goose Island out here. Looks like some fun things there. We'll turn, here's a modern view. And then we're looking the other way towards the east. A very busy day in the summertime back in the 1920s. Looks like everybody's having a good time. Here's the view today. They also added some cottages to the complex in the early 1900s. You could rent these and still enjoy the amenities of the hotel. These earlier photos show the Spanish names. This one's El Oporto, I think. Here's some of the cottages in later years, probably around 1930 or so. And some of those cottages still stand along County Road 15. Another view of the cottages, and a view of the cottages from the lake. Another view of the Del Otero taken from the north, from the railroad tracks. You can see they made it pretty easy for rail passengers to just step off the train platform here and go right in the hotel. By the 1920s, the automobile was displacing passenger trains, so you were invited to drive in instead of take the train. Here's another black and white view of that same entryway. Looks like a pretty cozy place. It would make a nice bed and breakfast. Here's that spot now on Sunset Boulevard, or Sunset Drive. This is a view of the hotel from the lakeside. The view today. Similar to Chapman's, the Del Otero built its own casino building. They called them casinos. There was no gambling that we know of anyway. Running boats, dancing, bowling, refreshments. Here's a view from the lake today. The actual casino building was probably a little bit more over where the water patrol is today. Another view of the casino building and Sunset Drive going up the hill. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this photo in Jubilee, kind of the same view, the casino building, the county road, and the view today with the former J.R. Clark building in the background. This is a view from about 1980 of the Spring Park shoreline. Most of these buildings are all long gone. We've got the Minnetonka Mist in here somewhere. Some other commercial buildings in Spring Park. This building right here is the only one that survives into this recent photo, right here. 1945, the Del Otero burned down, and a lot of the property was purchased by the Streeter people, and they built a factory building over here on the West Arm side, and then J.R. Clark built over on the other side. And this is a picture of the Spring Park Railway Depot. and this is a view of that same location today. We'll continue east on 15, Casco Point. Casco Point today. On 15 again, this is the Navarre Drive-In Theater that operated from the 50s into the 70s. A lot of you, I'm sure, remember that. Here's the view today. Most likely some of these evergreens are some of these right here. Now we're in Navarre, looking west, the intersection of County Road 19, late 50s, prior to the 65 tornado. Here's the view today. Continue east to Minnetonka Beach. A couple of things there. Here's the famous Lafayette Hotel, which was, again, built by James J. Hill, opened in 1882. And we've got the Belle of Minnetonka. Arriving at the hotel, this is actually Lafayette Bay. The hotel stood more on closer to the railroad track, and County Road 15 now runs right along here. Here's a view today, about the same location. You see the church here. Another view on land of the Lafayette Hotel. This is an incredibly large building. It's hard to believe something like this would be built on Lake Minnetonka. It had 300 rooms. And that location now is pretty much taken up with the golf course for the Lafayette Club. In 1897, the hotel burned to the ground, like many did, and James J. Hill decided to sell the property to the founders of the Lafayette Club for $10,250. And they built this clubhouse in 1899. This is the location of the clubhouse, the first clubhouse, because it was actually built more on the actual site of the hotel on the Lafayette Bay side. In 1922, again, a fire burned the first club, and they decided to replace it with this Spanish-style building. In 1924, it opened. And of course, it's the current Lafayette Club. Camp Memorial Chapel was built by Major George Camp as a place to have a wedding for his daughter Lucy back in 1888. It was designed by the famous architect Cass Gilbert, who actually also did the state capitol building in St. Paul. Of course, that became St. Martin's by the Lake Episcopal Church we see today. Heading back towards Navarre, this is Klaus's Tavern along the old alignment of County Road 15. We believe this is the location or incorporated in this building. We'll take a few looks at the Narrows. This is before they built the bridge across the Narrows. It was dredged in about 1882 or so to allow the big steamboats to go from upper to lower lakes. Here's the bridge that they added in 1911. We've got one of the streetcar boats coming through. This view is taken from the bridge looking at Minnetonka Beach. Here's the view today. We're standing on the bridge looking south towards Lock Point over here. And the view today. Another view of the Narrows with a cruiser coming through in the early 50s. The view today. This was kind of a neat color photo taken probably in the 50s. Bridge painted green. I remember that color. And it's been replaced in 1964 by the current bridge. Now we're going to head back to Spring Park. This is County Road 15 going west. Spring Park Bay over here, Del Otero up here on the right. We'll continue west on Shoreline Drive. Here's a modern view. Continue west, and we come to the Twin Birch Inn. And this was a restaurant on the highway where they served chicken and steak dinners. Not the restaurant kind, but home cooked. This was from 1930. Later on, they added on to the building, and it became a boarding house, putting up workers from Streeter Industries that was operating in Spring Park. And in the 50s, it became a nursing home. And over several years, it became the Presbyterian Homes Senior Complex, which we, of course, all know today as Lake Minnetonka Shores. And that brings us back to our beginning. And that's the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you.